The restaurant was softly lit that evening, with warm golden lights reflecting off the glass windows. Outside, the city buzzed with people rushing home after a long day, but inside everything felt calm and peaceful. A quiet hum of music played in the background, something gentle that filled the air without being too loud. A man in a dark suit walked in, his shoes shining, his expression unreadable. He was known by many as one of the richest men in the city, a man who built his empire from the ground up. But behind all that success, there was something missing in his life, something even he couldn't describe. He carried himself like someone who had everything yet felt nothing. Beside him was his young son, sitting carefully in a wheelchair. The boy had bright eyes that looked at everything with curiosity. Despite the challenges of his condition, he never stopped smiling. But lately his father had noticed that the smile didn't last as long as it used to. Life had become a routine of hospital visits, therapy sessions, and silence between them. They were seated at a corner table. The father nodded politely to the waiter, his mind already drifting to the work emails waiting for him. His son looked around the restaurant, watching people laugh, couples talk, and families share meals. There was something about watching others that made him feel both happy and lonely at the same time. Then came the waitress. She had a warm smile that could light up even the dullest day. Her voice carried a calm confidence, the kind that made people feel seen. She greeted them kindly, not with forced politeness, but with genuine care. She spoke directly to the boy first, not to the father. "Hey there, sweetheart, how are you doing today?" she said kindly, crouching a little so she could meet his eyes. The boy grinned. "I'm good. I like your necklace," he said shyly, pointing at a small silver pendant she wore. "Thank you," she laughed softly. "My daughter made it for me. She says it's lucky." The father looked up briefly from his phone, just enough to notice her kindness. There was something unusual about how she treated his son. She didn't act awkwardly around his wheelchair, didn't hesitate before speaking. She simply saw him, not as a disabled child, but as a little boy full of life. They placed their orders and she left with a smile. The boy kept glancing at her every few minutes, as if her energy made him feel comfortable in a place that otherwise felt too quiet. After a while, the music in the restaurant changed. A soft, cheerful tune started playing through the speakers. Some of the younger waiters began humming along while serving tables. The boy's fingers tapped against the edge of the table in rhythm with the beat. He moved his shoulders slightly, his body following the music in small, excited motions. The waitress noticed it as she walked by with a tray of drinks. She stopped for a second, watching him move. "You like this song, huh?" she said with a smile. The boy nodded, his eyes lighting up. "It's fun. I wish I could dance." Her smile grew softer. "Who says you can't?" she asked gently. He looked down at his hands. "I can't stand very long," he said quietly. She placed the tray down on an empty table nearby and crouched beside him again. "You don't have to stand to dance," she said, her tone full of warmth. "You can dance with your heart." The father looked up again, unsure what she meant. But before he could say anything, the waitress started moving her shoulders playfully, matching the rhythm of the music. The boy laughed. She encouraged him to join in. "Come on, show me your best move," she said cheerfully. The boy giggled, trying to move his arms and hands like hers. Soon his laughter echoed through the restaurant. Other diners started watching, some smiling, some clapping along softly. The father sat there in silence, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. It had been so long since he'd seen his son this happy. Usually their outings were quiet, polite dinners. No fun, no laughter, just silence and the sound of plates clinking. But now the room was filled with joy because one person had decided to see his son differently. The waitress then looked at the boy's father. "Would you mind if I helped him stand for a bit?" she asked carefully. He hesitated. "He might get tired," he said, his voice low, uncertain. "We'll be gentle," she said reassuringly. "I'll hold him." For reasons he couldn't explain, he nodded. Maybe it was the way she spoke, with confidence but also kindness. She gently helped the boy to his feet, supporting him by the shoulders. The boy held onto her arm, wobbling slightly, then took a small step. His face lit up with pure excitement. Everyone nearby paused to watch, not out of pity, but admiration. The waitress started moving slowly, side to side, letting the boy find his rhythm. The boy laughed louder, clapping his hands together, his small steps turning into tiny sways. The father's throat tightened. He wanted to smile, but something heavier pulled at his chest. He hadn't seen this much joy in his son's face since his wife had passed away. She used to dance with their boy in the living room, spinning him around, laughing together until they both got tired. He had forgotten what that laughter sounded like until this very moment. The waitress didn't make a show out of it. She didn't try to be the center of attention. She simply let the boy have his moment, free, unafraid, alive. When the song ended, the restaurant filled with gentle applause. The boy leaned forward and hugged her tightly. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice full of happiness. "You did amazing," she whispered, smiling back at him. As she carefully helped him sit back down, she looked at the father again. "He's a brave little guy," she said warmly. The father nodded, but words didn't come easily. He simply muttered, "Thank you," though it didn't feel like enough. She smiled and went back to work, serving other tables as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But for the father, everything had changed in that brief moment. For the rest of the meal, he couldn't focus on the food or the business messages on his phone. His mind replayed that scene over and over, his son laughing, the music, the kindness of a stranger who saw something he had forgotten to see. When the check arrived, he signed it without even looking at the amount. As they prepared to leave, the boy tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, she's really nice," he said. "Can we come here again?" The father paused. He looked around the restaurant one more time. The cozy lights, the quiet music, the people chatting softly. Then his eyes found the waitress across the room, busy wiping a table. For a second their eyes met and she smiled politely. He nodded slightly, more to himself than to her. "Yes," he said to his son quietly. "We'll come back." As they left the restaurant, the cold night air brushed against them. The father tucked his son's blanket around him and helped him into the car. But before he started the engine, he sat there for a moment, lost in thought. The laughter from the restaurant still echoed in his head. It had been a long time since he felt something so real. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about how a woman with so little had given his son something priceless. A few minutes of freedom, a few moments of happiness that no amount of money could buy. And though he didn't know it yet, that small act of kindness would soon change not only his son's life, but his own in ways he could never have imagined. The following weekend, the billionaire couldn't stop thinking about what happened at that small restaurant. He had been in countless meetings, made decisions worth millions, but none of that stayed in his mind the way that short dance had. It wasn't just a memory, it was a feeling. Something about it kept tugging at his heart. All week his son had been happier too. He talked about the restaurant every day, about the nice waitress who made him dance and how everyone clapped for him. "Dad," he said one night before bed, "she said I could dance with my heart. That means I can do it any time, right?" The father smiled faintly. "Yes," he replied softly, "any time." But deep inside, those words did more than make him smile. They made him question things about himself. For years, his life had been a race. Every morning started with phone calls and meetings. Every evening ended with silence. His late wife used to tell him that money meant nothing if he couldn't share joy with people he loved. But after she was gone, he buried himself in work, pretending that keeping busy was the same as living. Now, sitting beside his son's bed, he wondered if he had been wrong all along. A few days later, without saying much, he told his driver to take them to the same restaurant again. His son's face lit up instantly. "Really? The one with the music?" "Yes," the father said, pretending to look indifferent. "You liked the food, didn't you?" But the truth was, it wasn't the food he was thinking about, it was that waitress. Something about her warmth had stayed with him. He wanted to understand why. When they arrived, it was late afternoon and the restaurant was quiet. The same familiar tune played in the background and the smell of coffee filled the air. The waitress noticed them as soon as they entered. Her face lit up with surprise and joy. "Well, look who's here again," she said with her bright smile. "I was hoping you two might come back." The boy waved excitedly and she hurried over to their table. She knelt beside him just like before. "How have you been, dancer?" He giggled. "Practicing in my chair." "I bet you're getting really good," she said warmly. Then she looked up at the father, her expression gentle but full of confidence. "It's good to see you both again." He nodded politely. "Thank you for what you did last time," he said quietly. She shrugged lightly. It was nothing. But to him it was everything. As they ordered, she chatted a bit more this time about how busy things had been, about the customers she'd met that week. She didn't speak like someone trying to impress. She spoke like someone who understood people. Her laughter filled the space easily, and even the boy's father found himself relaxing, something he rarely did. As they ate, the waitress brought extra napkins, a glass of water with a lemon slice for the boy, and even a small bowl of fruit on the house. When he thanked her, she smiled. "He's growing. He needs something sweet and healthy," she said. The father watched quietly. Every gesture, every word seemed to come from a place of genuine care. He wondered how someone who worked such long hours could still find so much kindness to give. When she walked away to serve another table, he noticed a tiredness in her step, a quiet exhaustion hidden behind her smile. Her uniform sleeves were slightly rolled up and there was a small stain on her apron. But none of that mattered to her. She carried herself with pride like someone who believed her work had meaning. After the meal, as they prepared to leave, the father did something unusual. "Excuse me," he said softly to her. "Could I speak to your manager?" Her face changed slightly. She looked worried for a moment. "Is something wrong?" He shook his head. "Not at all." When the manager came, the father thanked him for the wonderful service and quietly left a generous tip on the table. But before leaving, he turned to the waitress again. "You have a good heart," he said. "It shows." She smiled, her eyes warm but humble. "I just try to do my best." That night, back in his large, silent home, he couldn't shake the image of her kindness. He had met hundreds of people who wanted something from him, investors, employees, partners, but she hadn't wanted a thing. Her kindness came from the heart, not from a motive. Curious, he decided to know more, not out of intrusion, but because something about her story felt important. The next day, he called the restaurant manager privately. He introduced himself not as a billionaire, but as a concerned guest. He asked about the waitress, how long she had worked there and how she was doing. The manager hesitated at first, but then shared a few things. She was a single mother raising 2 children on her own. Her mother was ill, and she worked double shifts to cover both medical bills and school fees. She never complained, never asked for special treatment. In fact, she often helped other staff when they fell behind, even staying late to clean tables after closing. When the father hung up, he sat quietly for a long time. The thought of how much she carried on her shoulders broke something inside him. He looked around his office, full of expensive art and designer furniture, and felt an emptiness he hadn't felt in years. That evening, when his son rolled into the room, he looked up from his thoughts. "Dad, can I ask something?" "Of course," he said. "Why did she help me?" The boy asked. "She didn't even know me." The father smiled faintly. "Because some people don't need to know you to care," he said. "They just see someone who needs a moment of kindness." The boy nodded slowly. "I want to see her again." And so, a week later, they went back once more. This time the restaurant was crowded. Music played louder, families filled the booths, and laughter echoed everywhere. But when she saw them come in, she made sure to greet them first. "You two are making this your regular spot, huh?" She teased lightly. The father smiled a little. "Seems like it." As they ate, the boy kept telling her stories from school and therapy sessions. She listened carefully, nodding and laughing at all the right moments. The father simply watched. He realized how much her presence brought his son out of his shell. She had that rare gift, making people feel they belonged no matter who they were. When the meal ended, the boy asked if the music could play again. The waitress grinned. "You mean our song?" He nodded eagerly. She walked to the counter, said something to a coworker, and moments later the same tune from their first night began to play. Without hesitation, the boy lifted his hands in excitement. "Let's dance again." She looked at the father for approval, and this time he smiled genuinely. "Go ahead," he said. She held the boy's hands and guided him gently, swaying side to side. The customers around them noticed again, smiling, clapping softly, enjoying the purity of the moment. The father took out his phone and recorded a short clip, not to post or show off, but just to keep. A memory. When the song ended, the boy hugged her again. "You make everything better," he whispered. She smiled, brushing his hair gently. "You do the same for everyone around you." After they left that night, the father sat by his son's bedside while he fell asleep. The boy was still smiling in his dreams, but the father couldn't stop thinking about what he had learned about the waitress's life. He thought about the long hours she worked, the children she cared for, and how, despite everything, she had time to lift others up. The next morning, he made a quiet decision. He would do something for her, but not in a way that made her feel pitied or indebted. He wanted to help her dreams grow the same way she helped his son's spirit grow. He didn't know how yet, but he knew this. Money had never felt more meaningless than it did before he met her. And kindness, simple human kindness, had never felt more powerful. That realization began to change him. Slowly, quietly, without him even realizing it, his heart was opening again. The billionaire who once believed everything had a price was starting to see that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought. And as he looked at his sleeping son that night, he whispered softly, "We'll make her proud one day." He didn't know then how true that would become. The days that followed were quieter than usual, but something inside the billionaire had changed. He no longer spent all his hours in meetings or looking over business charts. He still worked, of course, but he found himself pausing more often, staring out the window, thinking about people instead of profits. His assistant noticed how different he had become. He smiled more, though only slightly, and seemed distracted in a softer way, as if his thoughts were somewhere far from boardrooms and skyscrapers. One evening, after his son had gone to bed, he sat in his office at home, scrolling through the video he'd recorded at the restaurant. His son's laughter filled the room. The waitress's gentle smile flashed across the screen. The moment was short, but it carried something real, something money could never create. He watched it again and again until he caught himself smiling too. He wanted to help her. But he didn't want to do it the wrong way. She didn't seem like the kind of person who wanted handouts. There was pride in her eyes, strength in her voice. Helping her meant understanding her story, not throwing money at her problems. He knew he had to find out more, but carefully, quietly, respectfully. A few days later, he went back to the restaurant alone. His son was at therapy, and he wanted to talk without making things awkward. When he arrived, she was behind the counter tying her apron. She looked tired, but still carried that same light in her eyes. "Back again?" she said with a smile. "Your little man not with you today?" "He's at therapy," he replied. "He wanted to come, though. He's been talking about you nonstop." She laughed softly. "He's a sweetheart. Tell him I said hi." He nodded and paused for a moment, watching her wipe the counter. "You work a lot, don't you?" he asked gently. She smiled, not offended by the question. "Yeah, double shifts most days. Keeps the bills paid." He hesitated, trying to sound casual. "That must be hard." "It is," she admitted, her tone calm but honest. "But you do what you have to. My kids are growing fast and my mom's health isn't great. She raised me on her own, so I guess I'm just paying it forward." He nodded slowly, impressed by her quiet strength. "You seem like someone who doesn't give up easily." She chuckled. "Giving up doesn't put food on the table." He smiled at that. "That's true." For the rest of his visit, he stayed longer than usual, sipping coffee and watching how she moved. Every few minutes, she'd check on a table, refill glasses, or stop to chat with customers like they were family. She had a natural way of connecting with people, warm, kind, and real. It reminded him of his wife, who had always found joy in small things. After paying the bill, he left a note under the cup. "Thank you for reminding people what kindness looks like." She found it after he left. When she read it, her eyes softened. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. That night, she went home to her small apartment on the other side of town. Her 2 kids were doing homework at the kitchen table. Her mother, resting in an old recliner, smiled weakly as she came in. "Long day?" her mother asked. "Always," she said, hanging up her coat. Her son ran to hug her. "Mom, look. I got an A on my test." She beamed. "I'm proud of you, baby." As she cooked dinner, her daughter helped wash vegetables while chatting about school. The apartment was small, but it was full of warmth and love. Even though she was tired, she hummed softly as she stirred the pot. Later, when everyone had gone to bed, she sat by the window and took out the folded note again. She read it under the soft light. It wasn't signed, but she knew who it was from. The man in the suit, the one with kind but lonely eyes. She smiled to herself and whispered, maybe he needed a little kindness too. The next morning, the billionaire sat with his son over breakfast. "Dad," the boy said suddenly, "can we invite her somewhere? I want to thank her." He looked up from his coffee. "Invite her?" "Yeah. the boy said eagerly. She helped me dance. Maybe we can help her too. The father looked at his son for a long moment. The innocence in his voice touched something deep inside him. He realized his son understood something he hadn't for years. Kindness is supposed to move forward. That afternoon he made a few phone calls. Not business calls, but personal ones. He contacted a friend who ran a local community outreach program and asked if they could find out whether the waitress had any dreams or goals she wanted to achieve. His friend promised to check discreetly. A few days later, he received a call back. She's been talking about wanting to open a small center for kids with disabilities, the friend said. Something like an after-school place where kids can play, learn, and just feel normal. She even made some sketches of what it could look like, but she doesn't have the money or support. The billionaire was silent for a while. Then he said, "Thank you. Don't tell her anything yet." That night, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He imagined her working long hours trying to save money, dreaming of a place where kids like his son could feel free. It was such a selfless dream. He felt something stir in his chest again, something between admiration and guilt. He had so much, and yet she had more courage than he ever did. The next day, he visited her again with his son. She greeted them warmly, though she looked even more tired than before. "You two are back," she said, laughing. "I think I should start calling you regulars." The boy grinned. "We came to see you," she laughed again. "I'm honored." As they talked, a small group of musicians began playing near the corner of the restaurant. The boy's face lit up. He turned to the waitress. "Can we dance again?" She looked at the father, who nodded gently. "Go ahead," he said softly. The waitress bent down, holding the boy's hands. Together they swayed to the rhythm again. The boy laughed, his voice full of life. Other diners smiled and clapped along just like before. But this time the father didn't just watch. He stood up and joined them. The waitress looked surprised, but she smiled as he moved awkwardly beside his son. It wasn't graceful, but it was real. For the first time in years, he laughed. Not the polite laugh he used in meetings, but a real, full-hearted one. His son looked up at him, eyes shining. "You're dancing, Dad." "Yes," he said, smiling through tears. "I guess I am." When the song ended, the restaurant filled with applause. The waitress smiled and wiped a tear from her cheek. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you," he replied. "For everything." After dinner, when they were about to leave, he pulled her aside. "Can I ask you something?" He said, "Of course," she replied, curious. "If you could do anything," he said carefully, "anything at all, what would it be?" She hesitated, then laughed shyly. "You mean like a dream?" "Yes," he said. She looked down, fidgeting with her apron. "I've always wanted to open a place for kids with disabilities and single parents. A safe space where they could learn, play, maybe dance too. But dreams like that cost money, and I'm just trying to make rent." He nodded slowly, trying to keep his emotions in check. "That's a beautiful dream," he said. She smiled softly. "Maybe someday." He smiled back. "Maybe sooner than you think." That night he went home and stayed up until morning, sketching ideas, calling contacts, checking for properties, and talking to legal teams. For the first time in years, his work felt alive. It wasn't about profit. It was about purpose. He decided he would fund the project entirely but anonymously. He didn't want her to feel like it was charity. He wanted her to feel the pride of building something herself. When his son woke up the next morning, the father told him the plan. The boy's eyes widened in excitement. "We're helping her dream come true?" "Yes," the father said, smiling. "She helped us. Now it's our turn." He didn't know how long it would take. But he knew one thing for sure. His life was never going to be the same again. And somewhere across town, the waitress went to bed thinking about the kind man and his son, the ones who smiled like they were learning how to live again. Weeks passed, and life seemed to move quietly, yet something special was unfolding behind the scenes. The billionaire had begun working on the waitress's dream in complete secrecy. He spent nights reviewing plans, calling architects, and arranging meetings with people who could make it happen. He didn't want his name attached to anything. It wasn't about reputation or image, this was personal. For years, he had built skyscrapers, companies, and business empires. But this was different. This was the first time he was building something that truly mattered to his heart. Every detail was planned carefully, from the walls painted in soft colors to ramps for wheelchairs, sensory rooms for children, and a small dance hall filled with music and mirrors. He wanted it to be a place where no child felt left out. a place where his son could laugh freely and where the waitress's kindness could live forever. Meanwhile, the waitress went on with her life, unaware of what was being built in her honor. She continued working double shifts, helping customers with that same bright smile even when her legs ached. There were days when she barely had time to rest, but she never let her tiredness dull her kindness. Her children were her reason to keep going, and her mother's soft words every night. "You're doing good?" Puisham kept her grounded. Sometimes during her break, she would sit at the back of the restaurant, close her eyes, and imagine her dream. She pictured kids in wheelchairs playing games, single mothers sharing stories, and laughter echoing through the hall. It felt so real in her mind, but she always ended up shaking her head, telling herself, maybe one day. One cold morning, she was cleaning tables when a man in a suit walked in. Not the billionaire, but one of his employees. He introduced himself as someone representing a new community project. "We're opening a center for children with disabilities and single parents," he explained kindly. "We're looking for someone to help lead it, someone with experience, compassion, and heart." "Your name was recommended," she blinked in confusion. "My name? By who?" he smiled. "An anonymous donor. They said you'd be perfect." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She thought it was a mistake. "I'm just a waitress," she said softly. The man shook his head. "Not just a waitress. You're someone who makes people feel seen. That's exactly what this place needs." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't understand. Who would do that for me?" "All you need to know," the man said gently, "is that someone believes in your dream." That evening, after her shift, she took a bus to the address he gave her. It was in a quiet part of town, near a park with tall trees. When she got off, she saw a newly painted building. The sign above the door read, "The Open Heart Center." She stood there frozen, her hands covering her mouth. Through the large windows, she could see a few workers setting up chairs, painting walls, and assembling small tables for kids. The colors were warm and cheerful. It looked like something out of her imagination, only real. Inside, one of the workers smiled at her and said, "You must be the new director. Welcome." Her voice trembled. "Director? There must be some mistake. I didn't apply for anything." He handed her a folder. Inside was an official letter. It said she had been chosen to run the center, her salary secured for 3 years, all expenses covered by an anonymous donor. She didn't even realize she was crying until one of the workers handed her a tissue. That night she went home shaking, holding the letter like it was made of gold. Her kids were waiting for her at the kitchen table. "Mom, you're late," her son said. "We saved you some dinner." She hugged them both tightly. "You won't believe what happened," she whispered. When she told them about the center, her daughter's eyes widened. "Mom, that's your dream." Her mother, sitting quietly nearby, smiled with tears in her eyes. "You see?" she said softly. "Good things find good people." The next morning, she returned to the restaurant to give her notice. The manager was shocked but happy for her. "You deserve it," he said sincerely. "But tell me, who did this?" She shook her head with a smile. "I don't know. Maybe an angel." Across town, the billionaire received a short report on his desk. Project completed. She accepted the position. Opening date set for next month. He stared at the paper for a long moment, then smiled faintly. His assistant asked if he wanted to attend the opening ceremony. He thought about it, then shook his head. "Not yet," he said. It's her story now, but he couldn't resist driving by the building one afternoon. He parked across the street and watched from his car as she walked in, holding her daughter's hand. Her face glowed with joy, the kind that can't be faked. She laughed with the workers, adjusted a chair, and helped arrange some decorations. Watching her, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. His son, sitting in the passenger seat, noticed her too. "Dad, that's her," he said excitedly. "Can we go say hi?" The father shook his head gently. "Not yet," he said. "Let's let her have this moment." The boy looked confused but nodded. "Okay." When the center opened a few weeks later, it was a big event for the community. Parents came with their children, some in wheelchairs, others holding walking sticks or braces. There were games, laughter, music, and food. The waitress, now director, welcomed everyone warmly, her smile brighter than ever. Reporters came to cover the story. They asked about the anonymous donor, but she only said, "Whoever it is, they gave this community a gift we'll never forget." The billionaire watched the coverage on TV that night with his son. The boy pointed at the screen and said proudly, "She's amazing." "Yes," his father replied softly. "She really is." As weeks passed, the center became a second home for many families. Children who were once too shy to play now laughed freely. Parents who felt isolated found comfort in each other's company. The waitress worked harder than ever, but this time it was for something she truly loved. She spent her days organizing dance sessions, art workshops, and therapy programs. Every corner of the center reflected her kindness. One afternoon, she was in the main hall when a familiar voice called out, "Excuse me." She turned, and there they were. The billionaire and his son stood by the door, smiling. Her eyes widened in surprise. "You came," she said warmly.
"I've been meaning to invite you."
"Look at this place. It's finally real." The boy rolled forward in his wheelchair, looking around. "It's amazing. You did all this." She knelt beside him, her eyes misty. "No, sweetheart. We did this. You were my inspiration." The father looked around quietly, his heart swelling with emotion. The walls were filled with photos of smiling children, and one photo stood out near the entrance. It was of his son, taken during their dance at the restaurant. Underneath it were the words, "Every child deserves to feel free." He took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "This is beautiful," he said softly. She smiled. "I still don't know who made this happen, but whoever they are, they changed my life." He looked at her for a long moment, then simply said, "Maybe they just wanted to thank you for changing theirs." She paused, meeting his eyes. There was something in his voice that made her wonder, but she didn't ask. Some truths didn't need to be spoken. As the boy laughed with the other kids, she and the father stood side by side, watching the joy that filled the room. The sound of music began again, soft and familiar. The waitress turned to him and said, "Do you think he'd like to dance?" He smiled. "I think he's been waiting for it." Together they walked over to the boy. She held his hands, guiding him as always, and this time the father joined them without hesitation. The three of them moved slowly in the center of the hall, surrounded by smiling faces. In that moment, the billionaire realized something profound. He had spent his whole life building things to be remembered, but this was the first time he was building something to matter. The waitress had taught him that happiness doesn't come from what you own, but from what you give. And as the music played, and his son laughed freely under the soft lights, he knew that no amount of money could ever compare to the warmth of that month's past. And the community center had become more than just a place. It was a heartbeat for the town. Laughter filled its rooms, music echoed in the halls, and the walls told stories of courage and love. Every week, the billionaire's son came to attend the dance sessions, and his progress amazed everyone. He could now move his legs slightly with the help of therapy and rhythm. Every time he danced, his eyes sparkled with confidence, and his father's heart swelled with pride. The waitress, now known as the director, had found her purpose. She worked from sunrise till late evening, ensuring everything ran smoothly. The children adored her. Parents trusted her. Her soft voice, her patience, and the way she never let anyone feel small made everyone respect her deeply. One day, the billionaire visited again, this time without his usual formal tone or distance. He brought food for the kids and even joined them for a small art session. The waitress smiled seeing him there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, helping children paint colorful flowers. It was a sight no one could have imagined a year ago. A man once wrapped in business meetings and wealth, now covered in paint and laughter. As the day went on, he found himself drawn to how naturally she interacted with everyone. She never tried to be in charge, yet everyone looked up to her. It made him think of how leadership didn't always come from power or position. It came from heart. Later that evening, when the children had gone home, she sat on the front steps of the center, sipping tea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and pink. The billionaire joined her quietly, sitting beside her without saying much at first. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. He finally spoke. "You've built something beautiful here," she smiled softly. "I didn't build it alone. Whoever started this believed in me before I even believed in myself." He looked at her carefully, his heart beating a little faster. For a long time he had kept his identity hidden, not out of pride, but because he didn't want gratitude. He wanted truth. But now, seeing how she spoke with such honesty, he felt she deserved to know. He took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you." She turned to him, curious. "What is it?" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "The truth is, the donor who built this place, it was me." For a moment, she didn't move. Her hand froze on her cup. "You?" she whispered, eyes widening. He nodded slowly. "After that day at the restaurant when you let my son dance, something changed in me. I saw kindness that expected nothing in return. My son was happier than I'd seen him in years. You gave him that moment of freedom. I wanted to give something back, not just to you, but to others who needed what you gave him." She stared at him in disbelief. "You did all this?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Why didn't you tell me before?" He looked down, his voice low. "Because I didn't want it to feel like charity. You earned this through your heart. I just helped make it possible." For a moment, there was silence again. Then tears rolled down her cheeks, but her smile was soft. "You have no idea what this means to me," she said quietly. "You didn't just build a center. You changed lives." He shook his head. "You changed mine first." They sat quietly as the sky grew darker, both lost in their thoughts. The waitress looked up at the building, the lights shining through the windows, and said, "I always wanted a place like this. Somewhere everyone felt seen, no matter who they were. You made it real." He turned toward her, his voice warm. "You made it live." After that night, their bond grew deeper, not from attraction, but from understanding. They came from completely different worlds, he from wealth and power, she from struggle and simplicity. But they shared something more powerful: compassion. Every week, they worked together to improve the center. The billionaire used his connections to bring in doctors, therapists, and sponsors, while the waitress ensured the warmth of the place never faded. She reminded him constantly that this wasn't about money, it was about people. The boy, now walking short distances with support, loved spending time at the center. He became the heart of the place, cheering for others, encouraging kids who felt scared. His laughter echoed through the halls. One day, during a small celebration, he stood in front of everyone and said proudly, "This place taught me that being different isn't bad, it's beautiful." Everyone clapped, and the billionaire couldn't hold back his tears. As time passed, news about the center spread far and wide. Reporters came again, this time not just to talk about generosity, but about the power of kindness and community. They called it a miracle built on love. Still, the billionaire never sought public credit. When people asked, he simply said, it was a team effort. But deep down, he knew the truth. The real hero was the woman who once worked endless hours just to make ends meet, yet never stopped believing in goodness. One evening, after the day's work, the waitress found a letter in her office. It had no name, only her name written neatly on the front. Inside it read, "You once gave a little boy the courage to dance. You gave his father the courage to feel. This place stands as proof that kindness is stronger than wealth. Thank you for showing us what truly matters." She smiled through her tears, knowing exactly who wrote it. From that day, the billionaire became a quiet guardian of the center. He attended meetings, helped raise funds, but never took control. He wanted her to lead because she carried something far more valuable than money: heart. Years later, the center expanded into other towns. The waitress's dream grew beyond anything she had ever imagined. Children who once came in for therapy now volunteered as mentors for others. The place had become a chain of hope. The billionaire often visited, his son now taller and walking confidently beside him. Every time they entered, the kids would rush to greet them, and he would smile quietly, humbled by how far they had all come. One day, as they stood in the new building, the waitress looked at him and said softly, "You know, you never really told me why you trusted me so much back then." He smiled gently. "Because when I was lost in my own world of wealth and walls, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that real strength doesn't come from money or power, but from kindness. And you showed that to me in the simplest way, by letting my son dance." She looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "That dance changed everything, didn't it?" "It did," he said quietly. "For both of us." Later that evening, they hosted an anniversary celebration at the center. Families came from all around, the children performing a dance routine to celebrate the day. As music filled the hall, the billionaire and the waitress stood side by side again, watching the children move freely, laughing, smiling, glowing with joy.